يا رب إنك مقصودي.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على حبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وفقهنا إذا جهلنا وزدنا علما نافعا وعملا متقبلا يا كريم. وبعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Over the last few years we've been doing sessions, monthly sessions that discuss Quran. We've been having sessions discussing Tafsir al-Quran. But this course about marriage and family life was one that was considered to be something that it's become necessary that we have to discuss. It's an essential part of our religion. But there's a lot of problems that people find, those who are looking to get married, those who are already married, those who are no longer married. At one point or another, everybody faces some issue or some thoughts or some issues around marriage. And as we're going to see, we're going to look at reasons why people get married. But fundamentally, it's the way the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's the way the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's the way of all of the prophets. And too many people are either considering marriage or will be married without having looked at the prophetic guidance on marriage itself, which is then why we have too many people who are then not married after that. And there's a direct correlation between the two. So it's just as an attempt to try and put some ideas, plant some seeds into people's minds about the prophetic guidance around marriage. To be absolutely clear, this is not a fiqh course. We're not going to go through extensive rules around the fiqh of marriage. There will be one or two areas where it is needed, and we will delve into at that point. But it's more looking around the broader issues around marriage. So the areas that we're going to cover in this course, we have 7 sessions. The first one today, we're going to look at the reason why we need to discuss this issue, and we'll also look at intentions that we need to have for those who are considering marriage, as well as for those who are already married. And those who are already married, if they've not thought about these matters, then it's about bringing them into your marriage. Or if you have thought about them, it's about renewing intentions within marriage. The second session next month will be for those who are not married or those who are looking to marry again. And will be about choosing a partner, looking at the prophetic guidance around what to look for when wanting to get married, and also what not to look for. Then we'll go on to look at engagement. What happens from the point where the person's made the decision to get married all the way up until marriage, what happens around that up until the point of marriage itself. And then we'll have the two, perhaps the most interesting sessions. One will look at the husband's responsibilities and duties towards his wife. And the second will look at the reverse, the wife's responsibilities and duties towards her husband. And as we'll look at it, as we'll go through, we'll see most problems within marriage revolve around these two. Not knowing what's required of you, not knowing what's your duties, and in addition, not knowing what's the prophetic model within this, which is why then the 6th session, it's entitled Staying Married, but it's more about looking at the prophetic household, how he sallallahu alaihi wasallam was with his wives, how they were with him, looking at that perfect marital household, and looking to try and see what can be taken from that. And then the last one, which is unfortunately needs to be discussed, is looking at remaining married and how to deal with breakdowns and problems within marriage, and worst case scenario, if a marriage comes to an end, how that should happen, how that happens in a proper manner. So those are the areas that we're going to cover. We should also note here, anything that you engage in your religious life, and your whole life should be a religious life, but anything that you engage in, it is fard ayn for you to know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam expect from you within that. If you engage in something without knowing what you're required to know, it becomes a sinful act, and it's definitely not a blessed act. So somebody who gets married without knowing all of what we've spoken about, the boundaries of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, without knowing the prophetic way of dealing within a marriage, that person at the least is likely to fall into sin if he's not already in a state of sin. You do not engage in any activity in your life where there is some divine or prophetic guidance, which is most of your life, without knowing what's required of you. It's synonymous, or it's similar to prayer. You're more likely to invalidate your prayer when you don't know what invalidates your prayer. You're more likely to pay your zakah incorrectly if you don't know how to work out your zakah. If you decide I'll pay in Ramadan, you don't know how to pay it, you're probably going to get it wrong. And if you do, you're fortunate if you got it right. No difference with marriage. No difference with marriage. If a person doesn't know what the boundaries of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are, and he doesn't know what the prophetic guidance is, the probability or probability is that something wrong will happen within that marriage. And the problem that you have here, in the other two examples, and we can go on to fasting and hajj, if you messed it up, it's you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But here, the possibility is dhulm against another human being. There's dhulm against another human being, injustice against another being, and there's nothing more hated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than dhulm. There's nothing more hated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than doing injustice towards another human being. He can forgive faults that you do towards him, but he will not forgive you if you wrong another human being until that person has forgiven you. And so, when you move into marriage, considering marriage and move into marriage, these thoughts have to be in mind. Today's session is going to be more of an introduction. We'll try and have a discussion on every single point, and I really do encourage and I really do ask, please try and open up in these sessions. If you have thoughts about these matters, don't hold them within yourselves. Speak about any concerns, anything you may disagree with, you're welcome to voice, because these are issues that sometimes or often are not spoken of within religious settings. For example, this type of course, marriage and family life, when did you last see or hear of that being discussed in a khutbah in Jum'ah? I can never recall ever a khutbah on this subject, but it's a crisis within the Muslim communities, and the role of the khatib is to speak about what's relevant to the communities. When was the last time you heard that? We never heard about it. We don't have an opportunity to hear about it. We don't have an opportunity to voice our concerns about issues, to clarify what we may have misunderstood about issues, to get rid of our own personal opinions and bring them in line with the opinion of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So please, I ask you that as we're going along, and especially at the end, if you have any issues, don't hold back. Don't hold back. Please open up, however difficult it may be. Obviously, if it's something personal, that's a separate issue. But just these type of issues in a general sense, try and open up about these issues. We need to speak about them. Why do we need to discuss marriage? We've already touched upon one or two issues around it. Why we need to discuss this as a subject. The first, it's something that always happens. People want to get married, people are married, and people must know the prophetic guidance around marriage. The first thing to note from a religious perspective, according to the Hanafi jurists, this is not agreed, but according to the Hanafi jurists, it's considered sunnah mu'akkada that you get married in a normal situation. In a normal situation. Other jurists disagree with that. When the Hanafi madhab, Abu Hanifa considered sunnah mu'akkada that you marry. It's something that naturally will take place. It's something that, particularly within religion, for a person to avoid raises questions around his attachment to the Prophet ﷺ. If somebody, like this session was delivered on Sunday in Bradford, and somebody came up at the end and said, I have no inclination towards getting married. I don't want to get married. That raises a number of concerns. There's a number of issues around why would a person choose to leave something that's normal amongst human beings, and something that's not just normal as a human behavior, but it's something highly encouraged by prophecy, such that, as we're going to see the ayah, every single prophet without an exception married. Without an exception. Because Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam will marry. So there's no exception whatsoever. Every single one of the hundreds of thousands of prophets, whose nature, these are elevated human beings, these are not normal human beings. But they were sent as guides. Guides within your normal human behavior. So they showed you how to marry. They showed you how to rear children. They showed you how to be within your own home. They didn't just show you how to pray and fast. What religion has been whittled down to now, just a set of ritual obligations. They gave you every single aspect of your religion, and they demonstrated it. They demonstrate. So when a person comes and says, I'm having problems with my wife, say the Prophet ﷺ had issues. I've divorced my wife. The Prophet ﷺ divorced Sayyidah Sauda and then took her back. He divorced the wife. According to some narration, he divorced Sayyidah Hafsa and then took her back. In the Quran, Nass al-Quran in Surah Al-Ahzab, he gave all of them an option to leave him. So when somebody comes and says, I've got problems in my marriage, the Prophet ﷺ had to deal with issues in his marriage as well. So you have guidance from the Prophet, even issues around divorce. Like how could the prophetic household have such problems? Isn't that the utopian, the ideal society? But he's dealing with human beings. They're not angels. He's ﷺ is the elevated human being, but he's dealing with human beings. And ultimately, it's to show us how to be. There's no aspect of guidance except that he's shown us how to be. So people want to get married. It's something that our religion pushes, highly encourages. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, the hadith that's always read in the khutbah of nikah, مَنْ رَغِبَ عَنْ سُنَّتِي فَلَيْسَ مِنِّي النِّكَاحُ مِنْ سُنَّتِي فَمَنْ رَغِبَ عَنْ سُنَّتِي فَلَيْسَ مِنِّي. Nikah is from my practice. Whoever dislikes my practice, or رَغِبَ عَنْ means dislike, but can also mean turns away from my practice, فَلَيْسَ مِنِّي is not part of me. It's not part of me. So it's a religious requirement. Again, to clarify, it is not fard to get married unless, and this is something which we'll come to, unless a person is in a relationship where they're engaged in haram. At that point it becomes fard. Either they separate, they have no further dealing with each other, and if they can't do that because they're too emotionally attached, then it becomes an obligation upon them to marry. And if, as some will say, I can't marry her because my father isn't happy with it, and so at that point your father's got nothing to do with it, your mother's got nothing to do with it. If you can't stop doing haram, upsetting your father and mother is the least of the problems. It's upsetting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's the biggest issue. And then you go beyond what are cultural norms, and that's something that we're going to see as we go through this. One of the key reasons why we need to discuss is because marriage within the lives of Muslims is perhaps one of the areas that's most dominated by cultural norms that are not religious norms. We don't say culture and religion can't go side by side, provided culture does not transgress religion. Then you take your culture. But the moment culture and religion clash, then culture is left aside. And we'll see so much of that within marriage. Like the role of the parents is a point we're going to discuss. The sanctified position of the parents. To what extent will that remain in the realms of marriage? How much of a say do they have? How much of a right do they have? That's a point that will be discussed. So in a normal case where there's no haram, a person's not engaged in a relationship, or there's no fear of going towards haram, then it's sunnah mu'akkada. It's an emphasized sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, of all of the prophets to do. So it's something that's highly encouraged within religion. To say that I don't want to get married, to say it's not for me to get married, is not normal human behavior. There'll be reasons. And when we say not normal, it doesn't mean that person's abnormal. It means that there's reasons behind why that person would have chosen that. And those reasons need to be looked at, because human beings as a norm will engage in marriage. And it's something our religion pushes very strongly. So if a person now says, and مثلا, as an example, Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah never got married. So therefore I'm not going to get married. I'm going to follow his way. There's a number of answers to that. One, the Prophet ﷺ is our qudwa before any imam. The Prophet ﷺ is our model before any imam. Imam Nawawi, yes, he did not marry. He lived and died without marrying. But the Prophet ﷺ married a lot more women than we're allowed to. And that's the norm. The norm is to marry, not to marry. The likes of Imam Nawawi. Then the second point, if you can be like Nawawi, if you can be like him, if you can devote your life completely to this religion, such that your life becomes miraculous in nature, because he was truly a blessed individual. He's not a normal human being, Imam Nawawi. Like the ulama looked at the years in his life and then counted the number of works that he wrote and then matched them up and said impossible. It's humanly impossible for him to produce the amount that he produced. So if you're going to devote yourself to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the same manner, then you may have an excuse. Then you may have an excuse. But that's not the norm. So somebody comes and says, marriage is not for me, we need to sit down and discuss why not. Why not? We need to discuss why not. Now, and there will be reasons. People are not abnormal on these matters. There will be reasons that need to be discussed. So it's a religious requirement, not an obligation, but it's a requirement from our religion to marry. We've already touched upon this point. Generally we find, why do we need to discuss this issue around marriage? As a general thing we note, and it may sound very critical, it may sound overly critical, but normal institutes of religion, and here what's particularly in mind are masajid, mosques. The mosque, particularly the mimbar, is the centre of the community. The mimbar, the Friday pulpit, is the most powerful thing that there is in the community. That's the source of guidance for this community. When the mosques fail in their duty, and most mosques have failed in their duty, and when the mimbar are silent about these pressing social issues, then that gap needs to be filled. If the mosques are not doing it, we've now, as a Muslim community, we've got into this spiral. It's got out of control, where some people are not doing something, so rather than doing it, we just complain, why aren't they doing it? Why aren't they doing it? Our reaction, instead of, let's do something about it, we keep on going, the imam's not doing it, how come he's not doing it? The mosque are doing it, how come they're not doing it? Instead of, they're not doing it, they should be doing it, they're not doing it, so we'll do it instead. And hopefully they'll come back into line. Okay? We don't have access to the pulpits, the mimbar, but it doesn't need access to the mimbar, you just get a message out. You don't need an audience of thousands. The Prophet ﷺ had only a few followers in Medina. The pulpit was effective in Mecca. The pulpit was effective in Medina, but he had a small following in Mecca. It's not about numbers, it's just about giving out that message. About putting out that message. So if institutes of religion are failing, it doesn't mean we then fail. It doesn't mean we then fail. And perhaps discussing these types of issues are a fard kifaya. It may well fall under a fard kifaya. Fard kifaya means that it's a responsibility of some to deal with these issues. And if nobody's dealing with the issues, then somebody has to step forward and deal with the issues. The reason often why religious institutes will not be given the guidance often is because of pressures from the community itself. Like in many Muslim communities, these are all issues we're going to talk about, and I apologise in advance, because some of these issues may seem, why are you speaking about these issues? And before people have come up and said you shouldn't be speaking about these issues. Like in the mosque, you shouldn't be talking about these issues in the mosque. As though the mosque is only for prayer. As though the member of the Prophet, we only spoke about prayer. It was very different. The prophetic mosque was very different. But when you look at our communities, like issues like forced marriages, issues like domestic violence, breakdown within households, like problems of single parents households and how that affects children. Issues around, an issue that's becoming more and more common. The woman now, she's married and says, I'm not required I'm not required to live with your parents. Which is right. But then what happens? So he now moves out with his wife, lives, and the second brother does, and the third brother does, and the fourth brother does. What happens to the parents? Who takes care of the parents? Now we have, it's not extreme yet, but it's gonna escalate. And already we're seeing more and more of this. Now you have a conflict between Parents, the issue of parents and wife. And wife. And the Prophet ﷺ foretold this as a sign of Qiyamah, sign of the last days. One of the signs that he foretold, where a man will obey his wife and disobey his parents, disobey his mother. A man will obey his wife and disobey his mother as a sign of Qiyamah. But also he said, your best friend will not be your father. It'll be somebody else. A sign of Qiyamah, that you don't take your father as your closest confidant. You have somebody else as your best friend. That's a sign of Qiyamah. Very few men now, you say, my father's my best mate. It's not known. It's not known. That's a sign of Qiyamah. That's something that's worrying. That's a sign of Qiyamah. So these type of issues, they could easily be dealt with if they're spoken of in the masajid. But because often these are too deep set within, and often the musalleen, the worshippers, sometimes those in the front row of the masjid, sometimes those, if we were to look externally, will say, mashallah, he looks like a pious Muslim. He looks like a pious Muslim because he fulfills all of the outward requirements of religion. But when you dig deep, you realize it's not all as it should be. It's not all as it should be. And that's part of the hypocrisy that we carry within us. One of our teachers, he says, we become people who, when we leave our houses, we have to decide, which mask do I wear today? Which mask do I go out with today? Because our faces inside the house are very different. So it says, I'm going out, okay, I'm going to the Mawlid now, so I've got to dress different, I've got to look differently. I'm going to see my mates, okay, I'll be different. So every occasion, different mask. I'm going to college, university, or work, very different master. Very, very different master. Whereas the Prophet ﷺ, his home and his public, exactly the same. You saw no difference between the two. His private and his public, exactly the same. So we're just people who wear levels and layers of masks. And so those, when we look at the front row of the masjid, and perhaps, and it's not even perhaps even the Imam himself, he doesn't live up to that prophetic guidance, so he's going to find it difficult to speak. Often, if you want to know how pious a man is, ask his wife. Ask his wife. Don't ask his mates, ask his wife. And that's why when Sayyidah Aisha radhiyallahu anha was asked about the Prophet, what was special about him, she said, what wasn't special about him? What wasn't special about him? A woman who lived all her life with the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, never saw anything wrong inside the house. And that tells you there's not an iota of nifaq within the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's not an iota of hypocrisy within him, because for you to maintain a pretense for so long, it's near impossible. For almost 13 years, it's near impossible, or 12 years, it's near impossible to maintain that. Which tells you the way he was publicly, that's his nature, as it was privately. So because of this discrepancy that we have within us, and because if the Imam now does stand up and start speaking against domestic violence, and those in the masajid are doing it, speaking against social issues, speaking against dealing of drugs, speaking against pornography, speaking against alcoholism, speaking against gambling, they're all common problems within our communities. We're not willing to speak about them, but they're all common problems in our communities. Musallin, worshippers in the mosque, it's almost like we just want to close our eyes, not willing to deal with the issues, but the issues will come up, and they'll come up. We feel, even with some of these words we mention, people start getting a bit funny, getting a bit embarrassed. Like one time somebody asked a question about pornography in a mosque. I was told off for answering the question. Like, you can't come into the mosque, start speaking about that. But guaranteed, virtually all Muslim teenagers onwards, they've been exposed to something about it. The extent will differ, but virtually everybody's been exposed at one level or another. Teenagers onwards. It's not a problem of adults from childhood onwards, exposure. And then we say you can't speak about these issues. That's the reason why you have these problems. So when religious institutes have become silent, when the mimbar has become silent, then it has to be spoken of. When we were in i'tikaf in Nelson, we had this class every day after Dhuhr about etiquette with the Quran. But the last session got hijacked. We want to just have, it was pre-arranged, but let's have a question and answer session, just open it to anything that you want to ask. That's what one or two were pushing for this. Okay, let's go for it. Let's see what happens. Instead of 1 hour class, what was it, 4 to 5 hours session, vast majority of it on marriage. It became a marriage counselling session. But the point that's observed is, right, these are average people coming into the mosque. Some may be more practicing, some maybe they've just come into the masajid. Nobody speaks about the issues, but it's something that people face every single day. They need to know about them. So when the mosque becomes silent, when the minbar becomes silent, if it's not dealt with, people have no frame of reference for guidance on this. They'll go to the wrong sources. They'll perhaps make up their own judgments, or they'll go to the wrong places to decide on these matters. Another key issue, why must we discuss rampant divorce in our communities? Divorce has become too widespread in the communities. It's not to say, and that's why the last session will be looking particularly around how to stop divorce happening, and if it does happen, how to deal with it. How to deal with it. How to stop it, and if it does happen, how to deal with it. It's not to say that divorce is wrong. It's not haram to divorce. As we mentioned already, say the Sauda, the Prophet ﷺ divorced her. She was an elderly lady, the Prophet ﷺ divorced her, and she asked the Prophet ﷺ, take me back. She was even willing to give up her day for Sayyidah Aisha. Her only reason was, I want to be raised with your wives on the Day of Judgment. I want to be raised as one of your wives on the Day of Judgment. And so the Prophet ﷺ took her back. So, but what that tells you, divorce is not itself a problem. It's not itself a problem. أبغض الحلال إلى الله تعالى الطلاق. The most disliked halal with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talaq, is divorce, but it's not haram. And we know that the Prophet ﷺ will never do something that's haram, mustahil. It's impossible for him ﷺ to do something that's haram. So divorce in of itself is not wrong. Like, we're going to discuss about choosing, you pray your istikhara and you try and find out and so on, and then you get married and you realise this is not how it was meant to be, or I made the wrong choice, and then you come back and say, Shaykh, I prayed istikhara, and how come it's not turning out right? How come? And that's an issue we'll discuss about. But you've done everything that you assume to be right, but at the end of it, it just turns out it's not meant to be. And there are cases, you try your best. You can never guarantee what's right and wrong in these matters. Like, even if you went down the haram route and just went out with each other and lived with each other, get married soon enough, you'll end up divorced. Whichever way, and that's more likely to end up messed up. But if you went through the lawful method, which we'll discuss in 3 sessions' time, there's still no guarantee that it's going to turn out right. You only know once you live together whether you are truly suited. You only know once you live together. There's no guarantees on these matters, which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you a way out if there's a need for it. But it's not to be played around with. It's not to be played around, and that's where it's getting to in our communities. Like, the moment we just don't like something, I've had enough. The moment where I don't get my way, I've had enough. Instead of sitting down, trying to reconcile, trying to deal with problems, just divorce is becoming too easy within communities. The woman's not happy with certain things, he's not willing to divorce me, I'll get a khula'. I'll go to some council and they'll release me from the marriage. Instead of trying to make problems work and trying to solve problems, just looking for a way out straight away. So because of that, we need to discuss, and the reason why, like why we're tying this into rampant divorce, all of what we're going to speak about, if people are exposed and have some understanding about these matters, you're not going to eliminate divorce, but you're going to reduce it significantly. You're going to reduce it significantly. If you looked at choosing in the right manner, looking for the right qualities, if you didn't go down the path of haram, such that there's blessings in the marriage from the very beginning, you're more likely to have a longer and a more successful marriage. If when you're married, you try and ensure that you fulfill your responsibilities towards your partner, and she tries to ensure that, and then staying married, you don't just look at the boundaries of Sharia, you go that bit extra. You don't just say that I've got to work to provide for you. You say I choose to work to provide for you, and I'll go that step beyond. And you start trying to emulate the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam as he was. Like when your wife does something that upsets you, instead of just reacting as you would normally react, you think the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in 10 years never complained towards any of his wives. In 10 years he never complained. Never once said to them, why did you do that? So once you start looking at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam instead of your own experiences, You look at the Prophet ﷺ, often this is not an absolute, and I don't want to generalize, but somebody comes out of a broken home, there's a possibility his will be that way. If his parents have divorced, there's a possibility his will be that way. There's no generalization, because why? That's the model that you're looking at. Whereas when you start now looking at a different model, the perfect model, you're going to reduce the problems occurring. And when problems do occur, you've already got in mind how to deal with the problems. Because you've looked at the ayat in the Quran that tell you how to deal with it. You look at how the Prophet ﷺ told you how to deal with problems. You look at all of these issues, you understand your role in the marriage and she understands her role in the marriage. Once you start dealing with all of that and you have that exposure, what happens? It's not rampant divorce, it's just normal level of divorces. And as an example to highlight that, there was a course that was introduced in Singapore. By the ulama, the scholars in Singapore, and I think also perhaps also Malaysia, but definitely in Singapore. I have a copy of the course text that they produced. It's an excellent work, and I think it was about 15-20 years ago they introduced it, and they made it a requirement that for a person to have an official marriage that they must complete that course. Not to say you couldn't marry, but to have an official certificate of marriage, you had to have completed that course. What happened as a consequence? So divorce rates dropped significantly. Divorce rates dropped significantly. Once you're exposed to it, then divorce will become less of an issue. So rampant divorce is one of the reasons why we must discuss issues around marriage. Then, failed marriages, the problems of failed marriages. I'm going to list out now a lot of problems, and when you look at it, they're almost just like random problems which don't necessarily seem to tie in together. But as we look at them, instead of seeing them as random problems, tie them into broken homes and broken marriages. Because why? If you have a stable household, you have stable people coming out of it. If you have a stable household, father and mother, with all the problems that come, because there's never an ideal marriage. With all the problems that happen, but there's some stability within the household. You have that stability, you have stable people coming out of that household. You have breakdowns within the home, you have breakdowns within the people who are coming out of those homes. Those homes, we're going to look at an ayah in the Quran, it's in the text here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke about marriage, لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. Why did you give your partner? لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. So that you find sukoon with your wife. What's sukoon? It's comfort, it's peace, it's tranquility. If you're coming home and that's not present in your home, you're going to look for it elsewhere. You're going to look for ways of trying to find peace and harmony within your life. If your household does not have that sukoon within it, that peace and tranquility, and the ayah then continues, وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً, and He placed between you love and mercy. If that's missing, and that came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a couple who may not have known each other, it may be arranged, they've just met briefly, they just found out about each other, but they just went with guidance of others, prayed dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they went with it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then says, وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. He's going to place that love and mercy between you. You don't need to worry about finding that love and mercy between you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to place that between you. But when that's missing, then there should be some questions that are raised. Should be some questions raised about why is it that in a marriage that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed, He's considered legal, why is there no sukoon in the household? Why is there no peace in the household? Why is there no love and mercy between partners? What's missing? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who puts it there, which means if it's not there, He didn't put it there. He subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't put it there for reasons within the household. But He subhanahu wa ta'ala chose not to place it there. But once that stability and peace and harmony goes out to that household, then that person will start seeking alternatives. That person will be looking elsewhere. And most breakdown within communities and societies can be linked to a breakdown within families. The Prophet ﷺ told us in a hadith, we're not going to get onto this. I don't think we're going to speak about the issue about raising children, although that's a significant issue that needs to be spoken about. and there's many challenges and hurdles that need to be discussed. But this is just about marriage, and perhaps that's another course that can be spoken of and dealt with. But the Prophet ﷺ, he foretold, إِذَا كَانَ الْمَطَرُ قَيْضًا وَالْوَلَدُ غَيْضًا فَانْتَظِرِ السَّاعَةِ. He said, when you see acidic rain that burns, acidic rain, and you see children full of rage, he said, expect the hour. And we see children full of rage. But where did that rage come from? Single parent families, there's nothing wrong. Mother can bring it up herself, father can bring up the child himself, but you don't know what damage is happening there. You don't know what damage is going on within that child. It's all good and well say, I'm a mother and I'll bring it and I'm able to. Yes, you can be a mother, but you can't be a father. You can't be a father. And the father, a friend of mine, a very close friend of mine, 8 years, he's brought up his daughter by himself. And he's done an amazing job. Because it's rare that you see it that way around. Usually single parents are mother. It's rare to see, and I've seen somebody close to me who's raised his daughter and he's done a brilliant job, but he's still not a mother. There's still something missing within that child. Right? And that's why both have to be present there. Once you see one of them missing or that breakdown happening, the Prophet ﷺ foretold, وَالْوَلَدُ قَيْضًا وَالْوَلَدُ غَيْضًا. When you see children full of rage, and we see children full of rage because of that breakdown within households, he said, expect the hour. So we've got a lot of issues that we can tie into failed marriages or issues within society. Each one of these in truth are discussions by themselves, but the reason for listing these out is just to show why it's so crucial that we must discuss about how to keep a household together. Because once you start losing that, then these problems, which every single one of them, as you'll see now, are common problems within our communities. But that's because you've lost that bond within households. The first of them, dysfunctional communities. Breakdown within communities because that breakdown within households. Domestic violence, and that's a massive subject that needs to be spoken of. It's one of those unspoken issues within our communities. Then what happens? That woman who's getting abused in her home, because again the imam's not speaking to them. Imams are not speaking, the masajid are not speaking about it. So where do they go? They'll go to agencies. They'll go to authorities. They'll go to agencies and authorities to deal with them, who often will not be given the correct guidance. But she has nowhere else to turn. When that woman is ostracized because she's gone to non-Muslim authorities, the question should be asked is, why aren't the Muslim authorities dealing with it? Why did she have to go down that path? Instead of blaming her. Usually when domestic violence happens, she's the one who's blamed, not the man who did it. She's the one who's blamed. But the blame's on the community as a whole. Any household in which a woman is being beaten beyond extreme, that's a shame on the community. That's a shame on the community. And that woman who the father gave to that man to marry, and nobody in the community protects her. And she has no peace. She's in fear within her own household. A marriage that was meant to be لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, that you find peace and comfort, has become a hellfire for that woman. But people are not willing to deal with these issues. So domestic violence is a real issue that needs to be spoken about. And if it's not dealt with, then the effect that it's going to have upon that woman will produce those children, because that becomes a cycle of violence. And it becomes difficult to break out to them. The issue of forced marriages. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not given the father nor the mother the right to impose marriage upon their children. The role of the parents is only to facilitate and make easy. That's all their role is. The father and mother does not have the absolute right to say yes or no. They're there to help. They're there to act as a lens, because that person, perhaps when they're younger, may not be able to make the right decision. So they're there just to help guide them in their decision. But once it's clear that person's good, that woman's good for the man, or the man's good for the woman, at that point the responsibility of the parents is not to say yes or no. It's just to make easy for them that marriage. The moment your daughter or your son comes and says, I'm interested in that person, I want to marry that person, and you as a father and mother see there's nothing wrong with that person, it's not for you now to start saying yes or no. You're there just to facilitate. You as a father and mother are only acting as a filter. You are a filter, just to ensure that they're not marrying somebody who's clearly wrong, that they can't see because they are blinded. Your role is only to act as the filter. Once you've filtered out those who are not suitable, and it's clear that they're not, then your role is just to facilitate. And if you do not do so, as the Prophet ﷺ said, and this is a key hadith we're going to speak about in the second or the third session, where the Prophet ﷺ, he said, إِذَا جاءكم مَنْ تَرْضَوْنَ دِينَهُ وَخُلُقَهُ فَزَوِّجُوهُ إِلَّا تَفْعَلُوهُ تَكُنْ فِتْنَةٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَفَسَادٌ كَبِيرٌ. If a man comes to you and you're happy with his two things, and we're going to speak in detail about the second because everybody looks at the one but not the two. The Prophet said, you're happy with his deen and his khuluq. We all just look at deen but we don't look at khuluq. See, mashallah is a practicing Muslim. The Prophet didn't say stop at that. He said look at his character. Look at his character. If you're happy with somebody who comes to you, you're happy with his deen and his khuluq, his religion and his character, فَزَوِّجُوا, marry them off. Marry them off. Encourage your daughter to marry him. Don't start making excuses. Encourage your daughter to marry. You're not there to say no unless there's something wrong in his deen and in his khuluq. If that's missing, then you say no. If the key point here now, what did the Prophet then say? إِلَّا تَفْعَلُوهُ تَكُنْ فِتْنَةٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَفَسَادٌ كَبِيرٌ. If you do not do so, there will be disorder and corruption across the earth. And what's the fitna and the fasad that he spoke about? Zina. 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 And why is it? It's common now, even among so-called practicing Muslims, that they'll start building up relationships, virtually going out with them, may even fall into blatant haram. Why? Because in our communities now, it's hard to get married. There's so many barriers that are placed up in front of somebody who wants to get married. And when you come, there's a whole list of things that you've got to pass before you can get married. All the Prophet said was two things, deen and khuluq. And we've added so many onto that. The Prophet said religion and character. That's where it should stop at. There are other factors, but it shouldn't really be a long list. A long list like what tribe they're from, what family they're from, how much salary he's earning, what's his background, what's his caste, has he got a job yet, has he graduated. There's a long list, and we're going to speak about this list because these lists need to be taken apart and eventually torn up, and then go back to the prophetic list, deen and khuluq, character, religion and character. That's what the Prophet spoke about. And those who are married and have children, young children, you need to now look ahead 10 years time. Now let's say that you've got a child who's 5-10 years old. Don't just be thinking about those who are not married. You're sitting there criticizing your parents. What are you going to be like when your daughter comes home in 10 years time and says I want to marry him? What are you going to be like at that point? Are you just going to continue that cycle that happened when you couldn't get your way, so you're not getting your way? So because I couldn't get my way, you're not getting your way. Or are you going to fall back onto deen and khuluq? If you do not do so, and this is how it should be properly, although it never happens, in our community it doesn't happen. The first decent man who's of good religion, good character comes, your daughter's married off. And she's happy with that, your daughter's married off. It should really just be the first person who comes and asks for your daughter's hand in marriage. And from what you can see, the deen and the khuluq is impeccable. And even impeccable, we'll speak about that because of the unrealistic expectations that we have in terms of deen and khuluq. We have to be realistic about these. You're not looking to marry angels. And when that sister comes and says, I can't find that perfect man, and that was a messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The perfect man was everybody after that has imperfections, and so do you. And so do you. Are you saying I can't find that perfect man? You're not a perfect woman. There's no perfection in either of the two of you. We're just creatures of imperfection. So we just need to look at where we're at and stop putting unrealistic expectations on what we're looking for. And now, when we have a crisis, and it is a crisis, 30-year-olds not married. Men and women, they're not married. It's becoming a social norm, but it's a crisis in our community. When you're in your late teens, early 20s, you should have been boxed off. Finished, gone, out of the house. It should have been done a long time ago. Why is it's getting delayed so much? Why is it getting delayed so much? But once that starts happening, then you get the issue of fitna and fasad within the communities. But part of the reason why it's getting so delayed, and I know cases of people, because their expectations are so unrealistic. They're looking for perfection and they are not perfect themselves. They look at people, they like, we see that Shaykh, mashallah, what an amazing Shaykh, and my husband needs to be like him. Your husband's not a Shaykh. You're not a Shaykh either. So, I mean, if that husband who's a wonderful person, the probability is that his wife will be something like that. Although the truth is, even the Shaykhs are not, alhamdulillah, the people. But if you knocked on the door and went in their houses, you may see something slightly different. Perfection's only with the Messenger, human perfection's only with the Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But once you start closing off, you have problems. Then you go into the issues of forced marriages. The point that was being discussed there is that the role of the parents is not to choose, it's to facilitate. It's not to impose, it's to advise. We will discuss also the responsibility of the children towards their parents. Like, what if your mother said, I will never speak to you again if you marry that person? What should your response be? We'll come on to that as a discussion. But forced marriages is something that is not acceptable. And I'll mention here, this is going to come later on, and it's an amazing hadith. A female companion, I've searched for her name. There's no reference to her name. She's just Sahabiya. But she comes and does something that's amazing. She comes to the Prophet ﷺ and says, my father wants me to marry my cousin. Because of his position within the family, he wants me to marry my cousin. The Prophet, and she says, I'm not happy. I don't want it, or I don't want it. The Prophet ﷺ said, then don't marry him. Don't marry him. But then she said, but I'm not against it. Then the Prophet said, marry him then. Marry him. The Prophet was easy about these things. But then she made a comment which is important. She said, the reason why I've come to state this, I've asked you, and she knew that she could have accepted or rejected, she knew that. But she wants to bring out something. She said, I want all fathers to know that they do not have the choice in who their daughters marry. I want all fathers to know that they do not have the right to impose upon their daughters. And the Prophet remained silent, and his silence is agreement. When he is silent, if what she said is wrong, he must speak at that point. But he didn't speak, and that's taqreer. That's acceptance from the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There we have a clear nas, a clear text, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam approved of that Sahabi, that female companion who came and said, I'm not marrying my cousin even though my father wants me to. I'm not marrying my cousin even though my father wants me to. So even though that's going to be frowned upon and looked down upon, and that person's going to have all kinds of pressure coming onto them within the community, if you'd been in the prophetic generation, the pressure would have been on the father, not on the child. The pressure would have been on the father. So now you have forced marriages, which is completely unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. And that's, once you have that, you're going to have starting to have problems within. What's a consequence of forced marriages? You have somebody who's not happy in that marriage. They've done that marriage just to please their parents. And maybe they had no choice within that. They've just gone along with it in the end to please their parents. What happens? You have a woman or a man who's unhappy in that marriage. And if they don't feel content in that marriage, what then happens? They will look outside of their marriage. They will look outside of their marriage. And now, when haram is so widely available and so easily available, it's so important that you are satisfied in your marriage, that you want to be in that marriage. It's so important to be. Otherwise, avenues of haram are everywhere. Whether you choose to look for it or not, it's in front of you. So it becomes more of an issue that you seek out a marriage that you're happy with. And if your parents are happy, all the better. All the better. But first and foremost, that you're happy with. Then you have the issue of broken homes and single parent families that we touched upon. Widespread fornication amongst youth. Zina. Widespread fornication amongst youth. And this is not adultery happening. Adultery is something, it's one of the few things in Islam where if a person was to practice it, they've given up their right to live. The ultimate had punishment, and that person is put to death. And even though now, because the onslaught against Islam, people feel too scared to speak about this matter. People feel too scared to speak about this matter because the attacks that are leveled against Islam, it's considered barbaric. It's considered an unjust form of punishment. Well, absolutely clear, Ijma' Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, by agreement of the Orthodox Muslims, that crime is a crime by which a Muslim will be put to death if he committed that crime. But now the doors are open. Now the doors are open, and it happens in our communities. And when there's no Sharia that puts fear into people, then cancer spreads in society. Cancer, what's the point of capital punishment? What's the point of capital punishment? It's like a surgeon who'll amputate when cancer's spreading. When somebody's gangrene in his leg and you have to amputate that leg, that's to keep that person alive. These type of punishments are there to keep that society alive. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He speaks about capital punishment. Somebody commits murder, is put to death. After speaking about that, He says, وَلَكُمْ فِي الْقِصَاصِ حَيَاةٌ يَا أُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. He says, there is in retaliation, life for life. He says, hayah, there's life for those who reflect. What's the life of the society? Eliminate the cancer that spreads in society. Once you do that, then you have a purer society. But that becomes more and more common once you have a breakdown within the household. The woman doesn't want to be in that marriage, she's looking outside. She works in an office and she sees men all the time and she wants to be with them and not with her husband because the husband doesn't match up to them as she sees it. The man's doing the same time. He's out there, he's exposed to women all the time. He looks at home, he doesn't like it. He doesn't like it. And zina becomes an option. So the household, maintaining that prophetic household, protects you from wanting to look outside. Maintaining that marriage according to the prophetic ideals will stop or reduce these from happening. And then problems around drugs, problems around alcohol. All of these, see these last ones, alcohol, pornography, sexual abuse, homosexualities, these may seem random issues. They're all tied into households. Like pornography as an example. And that's been mentioned a few times because nobody speaks about it. But in Muslim community, it must be spoken about. And I'll give you an example why. I was asked this question, I think it was about 6 months ago, and I forgot to answer it, and I need to answer it. But somebody asked me a question, and he said, online, he asked a question, what do you do if the Imam is caught? Imam is caught. Checking pornographic websites. The Imam is caught. I said, you sure? You sure? He said, it's concrete. It's got to such a point that even those who are seen as guides of the community, it's got to such a point. What happens what happens now? Marriages, there's very few cases, particularly in the West, Muslims in the West, maybe even in the East to a degree. What's happening now? People are coming into marriage and they've been exposed to so much filth. They don't come pure into a marriage. And it's very rare that you'll find a case of somebody who's never been exposed to haram. And don't forget, haram, we're not just speaking about a haram relationship. Remember that the Prophet ﷺ said that the eyes commit zina. Even the eyes commit zina. Looking with desire at somebody of the opposite gender, even that's considered zina. And that has an impact upon your marriage. Whether you like it or not, it has an impact upon your marriage, and it has an impact upon your children that will be produced from that marriage. It will have an impact upon your children that are produced from your marriage. One of our teachers, he related that a Shaykh was asked a question, previous generation, and he was asked about the difference between children from that generation and this generation. He said, the Shaykh was asking, he said, when we were young, or the Shaykh was asked, when we were young, we were obedient and dutiful towards our parents. We would never speak out of turn. We would never harm or annoy or hurt our parents. But then the questioner says, but when we look at our children, they never obey us. They're always speaking out of turn. They never fulfill our rights and our responsibilities. Why the difference? The Shaykh answered by saying, and he tied it into marriage. He said the key was how you were when you were with your wife. When you were with your wife. And here the answer was when you were sexually with your wife. And we're going to speak about that, because even that, there's prophetic guidance for that. He said when you were with your wives, he said you followed the prophetic guidance. You followed the prophetic guidance. He said you read the du'as. You read the du'as. And he said when you were having marital relations with your wives, he said you were not thinking about other women. He said images were not of other women in your mind. So he said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed you with pure children. He said this generation, he said, is different. He said it's different. He says then when they're with their wives, they don't pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When a man goes with his wife, he reads a dua, Allahumma barik lana fima razaqtana. Allahumma jannibna ash-shaytana wa jannib ash-shaytana ma razaqtana. Allah distance the shaitan from the two of us and distance him from any children that you give to us. Distance him from any children that you give to us. Husbands and wives are together and they never mention that dua of the Prophet ﷺ. And then the Shaykh said, he said when the man is with his wife, he may even be thinking of another woman. And he said that's why Allah subhanahu gave you awlad khabith. That's why he gave you foul children. Children who will not obey you. Children who are disrespectful to you. So pornography has a lasting impact upon that couple. And it has a damaging effect upon that marriage. It will have a damaging effect upon that marriage. Sexual abuse is another crime that's unspoken crime within our communities. An unspoken crime within our communities. Because usually that type of abuse happens within households. And we're not talking here about what's spread across the news, about what happens in Rotherham, what happened in Rochdale and Derby. We're not talking about that. That obviously is a problem itself. We're talking about inside the households of Muslims, where a young girl is not safe to be around her own family members. It's not just the mother's being abused, the child is being abused. And we say astaghfirullah, but these are real issues within the households. These are real. On Sunday in Bradford, a brother asked a genuine question. He said, how would you advise somebody who's faced that abuse? How would you advise that? I said, I can give you general religious advice, but somebody who's been traumatized in that manner, that's going to damage them in their future marriage, perhaps in their life. So they need to go to people who are experts on these fields. Because often you go to an imam, ask him, like my daughter's, or she comes and says I've been abused, or even the boy's been abused, and you go to the imam and he just gives like general advice about patience and so on, which is fine, it's sound advice, but it needs something specific. That may exacerbate the problem. That problem may become worse because you've gone to the wrong person to ask advice from. I was told there's a book which has been translated into English. It was written by a mufti in Blackburn. It's Ahkam Hurmat al-Mu'ashara. Because the Hanif madhab was strict on this issue. That if a father sexually abuses his wife, sexually abuses his daughter, his marriage is over with his wife. His marriage is over with his wife, permanently over. And there's detail, that's the rule in the Hanafi as well as the Hanbali madhab, not in the Shafi or the Maliki. If a man abuses his daughter, that marriage is over. So the Mufti went through some details over issues in that book. And it's a small pamphlet, but detailed fiqh rulings. I was told there was an uproar in the community. Why? But then the reason why? Because it was so widespread and people of religion themselves were involved in it. People of religion themselves, so-called practitioners, religion themselves, because what's the consequence of that? Households now, they've been told you're splitting up households. But who's protecting the young girl? Who's protecting that young girl? That person who by all legal definitions is a paedophile who should be arrested and locked up. But what happens? The community just closes up on that. That's the father. It's the father, and that's it, it's the father. So that's an issue now. And once you start moving away from the prophetic household, that type of abuse will become normal within community. Even the issue there, like, you can look, what's homosexuality got to do with this? What's it got to do with this? At two levels. One, whether you like it or not, and I'm sure everybody's come across a Muslim homosexual. And the Prophet ﷺ told us that it will affect this ummah. It will come into this ummah. He told us that it will come into this ummah. In a time when the companions couldn't conceive of what that was. Like when they read the ayat about the Qawm Lut, they didn't understand what that was. Because it was completely alien to their understanding. But the Prophet ﷺ spoke about a time where it will appear within his ummah. And it's appeared in our times. What happens there? Like households that are not raised on prophetic, because now the school syllabus is all about this. That's the poison that's being fed to children now. And even at the moment now, perhaps the only thing you can do is just keep them at home. But I'm fairly certain, assume even legislation will be done towards bringing that poison into homes, directly into homes. So that's not an abstract reality that we're speaking about. It's something that affects Muslims right now. It's something that affects the children of Muslims right now. You're putting your kids in school, that's all they're being fed, that relationship is absolutely normal. If you think about this, like 15, 20 years ago, if you watch like comedies or movies or soaps on television, it's normal now to see homosexual relationships. It's normal to see that. 15, 20 years ago it wasn't. 15, 20 years ago you wouldn't see married couples, you'd see partners living together. That's now accepted norm amongst Muslims. That's just because for 15, 20 years, as you're growing up, you're just seeing on television, it's normal for a couple to live together without being married. But now it's gone a step further. Now our children's generation are going to be exposed to the norm of having homosexual couples. And soon it'll come to the point where this is going to come to the mosque, but the mosque are just burying their heads in the sand and not willing to deal with it. Where if two Muslim males or females come to the mosque and say, we want you to marry us, we'll laugh at that, but that's going to come to the mosque sooner or later. And that'll be spread all across television. That'll be spread all that mosque is homophobic. And pressure will become, and more pressure will come upon our communities, upon the Muslim communities. But that's fundamentally because of a breakdown within the families. Like, what would you do? Theoretical, hypothetical, but again, some people need to start getting ready for these scenarios. Your son who's now 17, 18, instead of saying, I want to marry her, I want to marry him. What are you going to do? He comes up and says, I'm ready to get married, but it's him, not her. And we say, subhanAllah, but be ready for it. Unless you're bringing up your kids in a prophetic household, be ready for that. And if there's no prophecy within that household, if it's not, that household is not shaped according to what we're discussing, then it's a reality that's going to happen. And it's already happening. It's a reality that will become more and more widespread, but it's already happening, particularly because in schools now, it's only just being fed into schools. Like those 7, 8-year-olds now who are being fed that poison, being asked to question their own sexuality. Are you true? Which way are you? There's no harm in being either way. Now, 10 years' time, they'll come knocking on the door and say, I want to marry this guy. And what are you going to do at that point? No. So that's why these issues become so central. Because right now, what would happen if a Muslim went home with, forget that's an extreme case, although it's not going to be abnormal. But even just a simple case, like he started smoking cigarettes. Like, can he speak to his father about it? Have you built up a relationship where your son or daughter can come and open their heart to you? Most parents no. Most parents, the father's just a dictator in the household. He doesn't listen. He won't listen to what his children. One of my teachers, he said, father and mother have to build up a relationship such that when they go through the difficulty of their teen years, you're the first person they'll speak to, not somebody outside of the home. They have that complete trust and bond with you. They're not looking to the school teacher or to some authority or to a social worker. They're looking at father and mother because you are their guides in their lives. That's the relationship that has to be built up. And that's why the famous statement from Sayyidina Ali, and some ascribe this to the Prophet ﷺ, he gives 3 stages in your relationship with your children. And this is a separate, that's the bringing up children course that needs to be looked at. But he said from 0 to 7, he said play with them. Play with them. Your children, you're not educating them, you're not imposing them. They're just in their age, in their years of play. That's it, nothing. 7 to puberty, educate them. Adults, and when's puberty at the latest? 15 years old. That's now an adult. Adults, befriend them. Befriend them. Befriend them. Like that's somebody you can trust and you can speak to because of the way that you built up that relationship with your. And so when something nice and simple, something as simple as cigarettes, or the type of people that they want to start hanging out with, or what they're watching, what they're surfing online, what they're watching on television, where you can speak to them in an open manner, not oppressive, you can speak to them in an open manner. Like one of the Shaykh, he said, a person who brings up their children in a prophetic manner will never have to tell them not to do anything. Will never have to tell them anything. Why? Because you've lived what your child sees what you expect from them within you. You live what you expect from your children. If you do that, if you're sat there watching telly all the time, say you can't watch telly. They see you going out in the front there and you're smoking a cigarette, outside, you can't do that. They see the type of people you're hanging out with and you can't do that. You're just a hypocrite. And you become the person that they will not look to for guidance. You're not the person that they'll turn to. So these problems, extreme problems, happen because of that breakdown within the household. Then looking at intentions behind why we get married. Amjad, can you come in and switch this, please? We have a hadith there, a beautiful hadith. The spirituality of marriage. You're a spiritual guy, aren't you? Absolutely. Absolutely. Sorry about the Arabic script there. The Prophet ﷺ said, الدنيا متاع وخير متاع الدنيا المرأة الصالحة. الدنيا متاع وخير متاع الدنيا المرأة الصالحة. When we now speak about intentions, about why you want to get married, about the motivations behind marriage, just bear in mind this prophetic statement. And for women, just reverse it. Just look at it in terms of a righteous husband. The world is all provision. We're moving through this world. We just pick up things as we go through this world. This dunya is all mata'. We're just musafirin. We're just travellers in this world. And that's how the Prophet described our sojourn in this world. It's just one long journey. You have a beginning point, which is birth. You have an end point, which is death. But all in between is one long journey. And you carry zad with you in this world. You carry with you provision in this world. Mata' with you. Mata' is something that you have with you, that you own with you, take with you through this world. The whole of this dunya is that your clothes, your phone, your car, your house, your money, your family, even your family, your children, even your wife, your husband, all of this just is something that you're going through this world along with. Because none of these have any permanence in this world. And you're just a traveller on this journey. With your marriage, you're just choosing who's the best traveller for me to go on, to help me on this journey. Who's the best person that will make easy this journey through this world? Because who you marry can either quicken your journey and make it a lot easier to get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or it can significantly slow you down. It can significantly slow you down. Who you marry can either make the journey a lot easier for you in this world, or it can hold you back in this world such that you start to lose sense of priorities in your life. You don't understand what this world is truly about. So this world is all a provision, but the best thing you can take with you through this world to help you get through this world is a righteous woman, al-mar'atu salihah, a righteous wife. So when you're thinking about marriage, when you think about intentions behind marriage, just remember that your husband or your wife is your travel partner through this world. You're on a journey. You can travel anywhere, but that journey just made a lot easier. You've got somebody who will make it easy for you, who understands that we're going on the same journey. We're doing the right things on that journey, instead of somebody causing a lot of problems on the journey for you, such that you miss the point of the journey. And it takes you so much more longer to get to your destination. The world is provision, and the best provision of the world is a righteous woman, and for the wife, the righteous husband. So therefore, make as much dua as possible to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because remember, your husband or your wife is a rizq that comes from you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's part of your rizq. Huwa al-razzaq. He's the one who provides. Your husband is rizq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your wife is rizq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's the one who ultimately, it's in his eternal knowledge who you're going to marry. He's the mu'allif. Who's the mu'allif al-qulub? He's the one who brings hearts together. He's the one who brings hearts together. Somebody you may have never ever imagined you marry, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides you're going to marry that person. It's inevitable that you're going to marry that person. That's your rizq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So even though the best provision for you as you travel through this world is a righteous wife or a righteous husband, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant you that. But as we said before, you want a righteous wife, be a righteous husband. الطيبات للطيبين والطيبون للطيبات. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, righteous men are for righteous women, and righteous women are for righteous men. You're not going to get somebody who's completely your nature. If one or two times people come to me, they've been doing haram and want to settle down, and I want to find a good woman. And how am I going to put you to a good woman? I've got to suggest something. I've got to tell them something about. How am I going to lie to that woman and tell her he's decided now that he doesn't want to do any more haram? Would you marry him? And that she doesn't do haram. She hasn't been engaged in haram. How am I going to put? And the same, likewise, the reverse. Like somebody once said, she's not a bad woman, but alhamdulillah, she's okay. I know she's okay, but she doesn't pray and she doesn't fulfill her obligations. But can you find her a good man? I can't. Because the truth is, a good man's probably, a real practical man's probably not going to look at that woman. Not necessarily to say that she's inherently bad and so on, but you generally tend to be drawn towards those who are similar in nature to you. So if you want to have a righteous woman, you make a dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What's the steps you need to take? Make dua so that you become a righteous man. That you become worthy of that righteous woman. And make dua that you become worthy of that righteous husband. Otherwise, if you're in a bad state and you realize that you're distant from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, start making some real changes. Otherwise, what happens? You not only seal the faith for yourself, but also for your children. Because any man or any woman who wants to get married should never just think about themselves. Do not be selfish. Do not be selfish. Always remember that you will be having children. And your children will be from your mother, from your wife. That's their mother. You're choosing a wife and a mother. You're choosing a wife and a mother. And she's choosing a husband and a father for the children. So don't be selfish in choice. You want a righteous woman, a righteous wife, then try and become righteous and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore read the prophetic dua. رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. This hasana in the dunya, Sayyidina Ali radhiyallahu anhu said, is al-mar'atu salihah. He said, there's a righteous wife. And when you make dua, our Lord grants us good in this world and grants us good in the next world and protect us from the punishments of hellfire. What's the good of this world? Sayyidina Ali said, it's a righteous wife. Because there's nothing better for a man to know that he has a wife who fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who worships Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He knows that when he's out and he's at work and so on, like he's working for his family, he knows that his children are in good hands. He knows that his wife's not sat there just watching television all day long, and just as soon as she gets a bit tired and frustrated and annoyed with the children, just puts the child in front of the TV. Just wiping her hands of her responsibility and just leaving the television to bring up that child, to become the educator of that child. And you then know that, alhamdulillah, I don't need to concern myself about these things. Because if you don't have that at home, when you're out of home, your mind is always at home. You've always got concerns at home. So one of the best things you can have, the Prophet ﷺ also referred to it as a wife who helps you in your dunya and in your akhirah, in your deen. A wife who helps you through this world and who helps you with the next world. Why marry? What are the reasons for getting married? The wrong reasons. The wrong reasons. And I'm sure there's more. If you have any other wrong reasons, just add to the list as well, please. It's the thing to do. It's the thing to do when you hit a certain age. Now the age is getting later and later. Before it used to be like you hit your 20s, that's already getting a bit too late. But now it's like I've got to get my job, I've got to finish university, get my job, got a house, got a car, got a nice bank balance, I've got a suitable salary, I've finished number 3, I've done all my haram, I've played around long enough, now it's time to settle down. Now it's time to settle down. That's definitely the wrong reason to get married. It's the thing to do, yes, if that's because those who are looking at who do it are also doing it because the Prophet ﷺ did it. The Prophet ﷺ did it. Then it's the thing to do. And when you say the thing to do, it's like expected you'll get married at a certain point. And you're not really concerned, just I don't care, whoever I get married with, I'm just happy now I've got married. That's the wrong reason. That's going to mess up your future household. That's going to ruin a possibly permanent relationship that you have. To please the family, the second one can be good, can be bad. We've already touched upon this. If your parents want you to marry your cousin from back home, just to give them a passport to get over, so they've got their residency when they come here, that's not a good reason. That's not, and we're going to speak about that in more. Right, Simon? What? How did I come over? I got my passport a long time ago. That's not the right reason to do it. If you're the ideal, and this is still there with many families, that you as the son or the daughter know that your parents will make a good choice for you. That's a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you have that relationship with your parents, that's a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because one of the difficulties we're going to speak about is somebody wants to do it in the right way, but not fall into haram. What's the way then that he does it? Because historically, traditionally, the norm is that it's your family's responsibility. But that was the norm when the norm was the family's going to find you a good choice. But now then the norm is not that. Then that's something that you're gonna have to perhaps go against, even though it means that it will upset the family. But just to please your mother for the sake of it. And we'll go into this discussion about, because one of the problems you have is, are you not disobeying your mother? And as an absolute, you cannot disobey your mother. But we have to make a distinction here between disrespect and disobedience. Because Allah subhanahu in the Quran makes a distinction between disrespect and disobedience. You never dishonor and disrespect your parents. But disobedience, there are certain cases where you go against what they say. There are certain cases where you go against what they say. And that's stated in the Quran, وَإِنْ جَاهَدَاكَ عَلَىٰ أَن تُشْرِكَ بِمَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٌ فَلَا تُطِعْهُمَا وَصَاحِبْهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا. This is the extreme case of kufr, where a companion had his mother trying to force him, his parents trying to force him to reject Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, if your parents strive and struggle to make you worship gods along with me, do not obey them. That's the first thing. So that's now disobedience where it involves haram. And we can also add disobedience where it violates the rights of somebody else. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the man an absolute right to marry whoever he wants. The woman, a virtual, not absolute, but as long with certain conditions of kafa'ah, of compatibility, she also has the right to marry whoever she wants. As long as, and we'll list out those requirements, she meets certain requirements, she has the right to marry whoever she wants. So that's now violating a right. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, do not obey them. But then he said, but live with them in a good manner. Don't disrespect them. So if your father and mother are trying to force you into marriage that you're not happy with, you may disagree with that, but you never disrespect them. You never abuse them, you never insult them. You never say anything that will upset them, but at the same time, like she doesn't practice a religion. If she doesn't pray, I don't want to marry someone. It doesn't matter if she's related, I don't want to marry that person. You're entitled to stand your ground, but you're not entitled to disrespect your parents. But we'll come on to that in more detail, because somebody can then argue, isn't that itself disrespect and dishonouring the name of the family? I can't be potential break ties with another part of the family. So there's some fallout to that which we will discuss. Falling for an attractive woman, that's not necessarily a wrong reason. We're going to speak about this in the next session. The Prophet ﷺ spoke about 4 reasons that people marry. He placed an emphasis on one, but he didn't negate the others. He said they marry لِجَمَالِهَا لِحَسَبِهَا لِمَالِهَا لِدِينِهَا. He mentioned 4 things. I'm going to speak about that in detail next session. He said because of her looks, because of her beauty, because of her family, hasab, her status and her rank, because of her mal, because of her financial position, she's wealthy, she's from a wealthy family, she herself is wealthy, because of deen, religion. So the Prophet ﷺ said, فَاظْفَرْ بِذَاتِ الدِّينِ تَرِبَتْ يَدَاكَ. He said, you'll be successful with the woman of religion. May your hands be covered in dust. You'll be successful with a woman of religion. But he didn't say don't consider the other 3. And that's why some people, again, I know of cases of people, she's a good woman, but now he's like, I'm not attracted to her and I'm looking outside. Who told you not to? The Prophet actually said sit with them and look at each other to make sure that you're happy with each other. He told you to do that. So who told you to completely ignore the other 3? The Prophet didn't tell you that. So to marry someone that you consider attractive, that's not wrong unless that's the only reason why you marry her. You don't care about what her religion is. You don't care about other factors. It's just that you're falling for her based upon that. Then that marriage will end up in problems. But if it's somebody who's a woman of religion at the same time, you should, and sunnah, you find it attractive, then that's a blessed marriage. And that's how it should be. That's a wrong reason if that's the only reason that you do for. So we quickly run through the right reasons. And these are intentions. And those who are already married, make these your intentions. Those who are not married, before you engage in marriage, make sure that you think about these reasons for marriage. The first one is based on an ayah in the Quran. Marriage is a favour of God. It's a ni'mah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And ask anybody who has a good wife, ask anybody who has good children, what a ni'mah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is. Now you should always be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that. You should even let your wife know that. Tell your wife that. Because when you look at problems in marriages and you return back on, alhamdulillah, that you've got that security and you've got that comfort and so on, there's nothing like that feeling of security within a marriage. Right? A woman that she fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that that when she's away, that she'll protect herself and she'll protect your family and she'll take care of your wealth. She takes care of you as well as herself. Heck, she's concerned about you as well as herself. And likewise, the woman, she knows that when her husband's out, he's not looking at other women, he's not thinking about haram, he's satisfied with her, he considers her to be a blessed woman. He knows that he does everything he can for her to take care of her. That's a great ni'mah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us in the Quran, وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. Mention the favours of your Lord, speak about them. Tell your wife that. Don't tell her too often. I'll get to her head. I'll get to her. But just occasionally just remind her that you are a favour of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala towards me. Your children, the same thing. Just always think about when you look at وَالْوَلَدُ غَيْظًا, children full of rage. And then you've got a beautiful child that is at home and who prays at home. Hasn't reached the age of puberty and they're still making sujood in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They haven't been exposed to haram. What a favour of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon you. Make that your intention. I want from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the blessing of marriage so I can recognise the favour of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then even on top of that, why? So I can express favours. I can go into a state of shukr lillahi ta'ala. Why am I marrying? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives me that favour so I can thank Him for that favour. Look at that ayah. And I ask you all of you go away. Because that ayah in Surah Al-Rum. Surah Al-Rum is an amazing surah. It's one of the Alif Lam Mim surahs. It's in Juz 21, Para 21. Read the ayah. There's one ayah before it, and then I think there's 5 ayahs after it. All of them begin with the same thing. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ 5 or 6 verses. Allah, I think it's verse 20 to 25 or 26. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, from His signs is this, from His signs is this. He just lists out signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He challenges you to reflect over them. He challenges you about these ayat. إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَسْمَعُونَ. In these are signs for those who listen, for those who think, for those who have knowledge. In this one, for those who reflect. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is challenging you with these signs. The second one out of this, I think 5 signs, is marriage itself. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lists marriage as a sign of His subhanahu wa ta'ala. Marriage is a sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That He created you from your spouses. That you're shaqa'iq al-rijal. Women are partners of men. He created you from the same original soul. Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam. Hawa, the first woman, came out of the first man. And that's our belief. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala indicated that, alluded towards that in the Quran when He says, يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة. Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam. وخلق منها زوجها. Fear your Lord, O humanity. Fear your Lord, who created you from one soul, Adam alayhi salam. And He created from that one soul its partner, Hawa. That's a reference to Adam and Hawa, Adam and Eve, the original creation. And although we don't want to go off too much on a tangent, when you look at this ayah, it's one of the 7 ayahs that were revealed in Medina that began with Ya ayyuhan nas, O human beings. Because Medina is always O believers, but here when Allah wants you to reflect over the nature of human being itself, the origins of human being, وَبَثَّ مِنْهُمَا رِجَالٍ كَثِيرًا وَنِسَاءً. He produced from that original marriage many males and females. And then He tells you, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ الَّذِي تَسَاءَلُونَ بِهِ وَالْأَرْحَامِ. Fear God and beware and be careful of the family ties that you have through marriage. That's a call to all human beings, not just to the believers, all human beings, because marriage is an essential part of human nature. It started with the original human being. There wasn't 2 original creations. He subhanahu wa ta'ala could have done that. He could have created Adam alayhi salam directly and Hawa directly, but He created one out of the other. He created one out of the other. So He created for you from yourself spouses. Why? Lam ta'leel. The fuqaha, the jurists, when they speak about the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instituted marriage, they'll give you certain legal reasons. This is the Quranic reason. This is the reason that Allah, and those reasons are absolutely sound. But this is the reason that you should always reflect over within your marriage. The first we mentioned, لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, so you can find comfort, peace, sukoon. Sakana is the opposite, sukoon is the opposite of haraka. Sukoon and haraka. When you're always in movement. Haraka is movement, always in movement. Sukoon is something that's motionless and still and calm. And that's what a marriage does. Your haraka is outside of your home. You're busy through your day. But when you come back and the wife is busy, when you come back together, you now come to that state of peace and tranquility. Now you're calm and you're still after all of that busy day that you've had. You need to come home to that home in which you find that peace. And if that home doesn't have peace, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has removed something from that home. And you must make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, put it back. Put it back. لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. Your calmness within your being. Because human beings are always on the go. You're always, and this is particularly more so for the man, because the man's the breadwinner. The woman, she may choose just to be the one who takes care of the home and raises the family and so on. But ultimately the man's the breadwinner. لِتَشْقَى. Allah subhanahu فَلَا يُخْرِجَنَّكُمَا مِنَ الْجَنَّةِ لِتَشْقَى. And when He speaks to Adam and Eve, the original father and mother, He said, do not let Iblis drive you out of paradise, such that you, لِتَشْقَى أَنْتَ يُخْرِجَنَّكُمَا. Allah subhanahu addresses both, that He causes the both of you to leave paradise, so that you, the male, will have to toil. لِتَشْقَى, not لِتَشْقَيَا. لِتَشْقَى, meaning what? This world is toil for man. Work, providing income, putting food on the table. That's a responsibility of the man, بِنَص الْقُرْآن, based upon the statement of the Qur'an. Where do you find that calmness after that? It's when you're alone with your wife. When you're alone with your wife. And if that's missing, then something is missing from. And it's missing in too many marriages, it's missing. But perhaps because people didn't think that's the reason why I get married. People didn't think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told you, lam at-ta'leel. That's one, the particle itself is saying the reason why you marry is this. The reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created spouses from yourself. Why from yourselves? Because Hawa came out of Adam. It's like when you're with your wife, she's gone back into you. She's gone back into you. Something that's missing from you has been put back into you. And if when the two come together, they should be together in that manner, there's still something missing, then that niyyah is missing. Then that intention is missing. So think about لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. That if you find you should actively work to bring that sukoon within your marriage. If you find that it's not there, that you've been married, you've been living together 10 years, 15 years, and it's not to the same. It's not about being this wonderful romance all the time. It's not about that. It's about when the two of you together, you find peace with each other. You find peace with each other. Because when you marry, remember, and I don't want to put off those who are not married, but remember, you're married for life. Right? There's no coming back from. So for the rest of your life, you need this sukoon with her. For the rest of you, and this is not to put off those who are married. Even when you die, you'll be reunited with her in Jannah. The marriage carries on inside the Jannah. So it's not just for the rest of your life, it's for the rest of your existence. So when you agree to that marriage, so therefore choose wisely, because you're stuck with her in paradise, and she's stuck with him in paradise for the rest of your existence. But in the rest of your life, that sukoon has to be there. That tranquility and peace has to be there. Then the other thing that we mentioned before, and He, subhanahu wa ta'ala, placed between you love and mercy. The words here, وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. The love here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is different to mahabba. Not mahabba, mawadda. There's different types of love. This one is a unique divine love, which emanates from al-wadud. Al-wadud, the intensely loving God. There's a different type of, mahabba is a different type of love. Hatta uhibba, that's a different type of love. But this is a permanent type of love that resides in the hearts of husband and wife, that came from the attributes of Allah subhanahu al-wadud. So how is it that a couple who may not have known each other, that you only may know some basic things about it, but when you come together, you find suddenly this strong love between the two of you. You find that you show this mercy to her that you don't show towards any other people. That came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because He said, and He places between the two of you mawaddatan wa rahmah. This permanent, intense love, and that's a love that will not die over time. Wa rahmah, and mercy. Mercy came from ar-rahim. Mawadda came from al-wadud. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is allowing you to taste two of His attributes just by you being married. And that's something unique, because all believers taste rahmah. All believers taste the aspect of rahim. And we have in the Quran, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ سَيَجْعَلُ لَهُمُ الرَّحْمَنُ وُدًّا. That's also from wadud. Those who believe and do good deeds, Ar-Rahman, Allah subhanahu, the merciful will grant them wood, this special love of His subhanahu wa ta'ala. But He gives something unique towards those who marry. Those who marry. And that's something you will not taste, that aspect of you will not taste unless you are married. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told you a couple of things. One, the reason, لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. That's something that's missing with you that you can never attain unless you're married. That sukoon and calmness and stillness within you can never attain unless you're married. That comes because of your marriage. And He subhanahu wa ta'ala places love and mercy between you. And if that's not there, then you need to ask questions about it. You need to ask some real questions about your marriage. It's the way of all the prophets. We mentioned that at the beginning. Just to repeat the point, there's an ayah in the Quran. وَلَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا رُسُلًا مِّن قَبْلِكَ وَجَعَلْنَا لَهُمْ أَزْوَاجًا وَذُرِّيَّةً. We sent messengers before you. And this is an address. أَرْسَلْنَاكَ أَنْتَ يَا مُحَمَّدْ. O Muhammad, we've sent before you messengers. And we gave all of them أَزْوَاجًا وَذُرِّيَّةً. We gave all of them wives and children. To tell you and I that however great a rank of human being they are, and they are the faultless human beings, they are the flawless, the infallible human beings, but you and I, to know how to be with our wives and our children, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent all of them with wives and children, despite the fact they had no need for wives and children. They had no need for wives and children. Everything about them was to show us a way. They ate, so we know how to eat. They didn't need to eat. They didn't need to eat. Days would go, the Prophet ﷺ says, my Lord gives me food directly. He doesn't need to eat. He sleeps, but his eyes are closed, but his heart is wide awake. He doesn't need that sleep. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created these human qualities within the messengers because they are human beings. He's given them these human qualities. Even though they have unique qualities, they have qualities that they share with human beings so that they show us how we should be when we're in those cases. They showed us how to be with our wives. Every single one of them. They showed us how to be with our children. So the right reason, what's your niyyah in marrying? Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam married. What's your niyyah in having children? Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had children. If it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me. If he was willing to do it, then I'm willing to do it. Because he didn't have a need to, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave it to him to show us how to be. So make that your niyyah when you're there and you're about to get married and the Imam is asking you, say these words, at that point, think Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Think Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam at that point. You're thinking, you're having these last moments, these thoughts of the last moment, should I do this, should I not do this? You're having these thoughts about it. Think at that moment the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that I'm doing this because he sallallahu alaihi wasallam did it to show me how to do it. To show me how to do it, the one who had no need. It completes half of faith. It completes half of faith. 2 points, because we need to quickly finish on this one. 2 points. 1, don't forget the other half of faith. The other half of faith is fear God. So alhamdulillah, you're married. You still got a long way to go. It's not now that your religion is complete. Complete it with the other half. But by having that half, the other half becomes a lot easier. And particularly if you've done it for the right reasons, if you did it because you fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're following the way of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you've made the right choices, you've taken the advice of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you haven't just gone with whatever you feel is the right thing to do. You've looked at what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told you is the right thing to do. Now you've got that. One half of your religion, strive along with your partner to fulfill the other half of your religion. The second, you want to flip that statement around. When the Prophet ﷺ said he has helped in half his religion, whoever he grants a righteous woman, means if you've not been granted, half of your religion is missing. So all those who are not married, you have one half of your religion absent. And until you're married, one half of your religion is absent. Until you're married, whatever you do in your religion, you've got a significant gap within your religion. That's why two points to mention. One, al-Ghazali rahimahullah, in his Ihya, he said the prayer of a married person is rewarded 70 times more than a bachelor. 70 times more than a bachelor. So on that basis alone, you need to get married. Just to increase the reward of your prayer. That's the only reason I want to get a greater prayer. Why do you marry me? So I can pray better. And the reason that's mentioned about that, the man or the woman who's not married will have distractions in the mind over these matters of marriage. Over these matters of marriage. There are certain desires within a person that cannot be fulfilled. That will affect your prayer. And you do not pray whilst you have certain... this is unrelated. The Prophet ﷺ forbade you from eating whilst you're hungry and food is in front of you. If you're starving and food's in front of you and prayer's about to take place, eat the food. Eat the food. The Prophet forbade you from praying... If you're hungry and food is in front of you, why? Because if you're stood up there praying and that food's there and you're starving, you're not thinking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're thinking food. Your mind is distracted. Without marriage, mind is distracted. There are thoughts in your mind that cannot be removed unless you're married. Until you're married, you will not have as complete a reward, as complete a prayer as the one who's married. The second thing to mention, a companion who was on his deathbed, his wife had just died. He says to those around, marry me off to somebody. Think about that. He's dying. He says to them, marry me off to somebody. They ask why. He said, I cannot face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unmarried. He said, I cannot face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unmarried. So that person who's not married, if death strikes you at any moment and you stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, half of your religion is absent. Half of your religion is still incomplete. And you are answerable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, particularly where it was possible for you to marry. Particularly where it's possible for you to marry. So marriage completes half of faith, don't forget the other half. You want to become rich, get married. That's based on an ayah in the Quran. There's also a hadith, it's not there, but there's also a hadith that speaks about it. That point in brackets is very important. Never let the fact that you haven't got enough money, you can't afford it, never let that be the reason to stop you from getting married. And a second point, because we live in a world that's run and driven and motivated by money. If you don't have, you can't do. That's not deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ar-Razzaq. If you have belief in that and she's happy with you as you are, then don't let the fact that you cannot provide for her, don't let that stop you. Just remember your provision will come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because you've got married. Where's the second? Don't let the fact that you lack money stop you from having children. Don't let that be a bar from you having children. Again, that's a materialistic society. That's a society run by and driven by money. I can't afford to have children. Who said you're the one who determined? That child, when it's born, or when it's in the womb of its mother, 120 days, the angel comes and writes on its forehead, amongst the things it writes, rizqihi. It's rizq. It writes every single rizq, every single penny that you will consume in your life from beginning to end has been written on your forehead. You, the father and mother, have nothing to worry about. Whatever's going to come will come. You're just a sabab, you're just a means, you're just a step by which that can arrive towards that child. So don't let a lack of money stop you from getting married. Don't let a lack of money stop you from having children. The ayah in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَنْكِحُوا الْأَيَامَ مِنْكُمْ وَالصَّالِحِينَ مِنْ عِبَادِكُمْ وَإِمَائِكُمْ. Marry off your unmarried ones. Marry off those amongst you unmarried, وَالصَّالِحِينَ, and the righteous ones amongst you. This ayah is the key. إِنْ يَكُونُوا فُقَرَاءَ يُغْنِهِمُ اللَّهُ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ. If they are poor, this is what we call in Arabic jawab shart. This is a response to the condition. If this happens, this will happen. A guarantee from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If what happens? If they don't have the means to provide, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will provide for them. You have no concern about that. So don't start thinking about dowry is going to be this much. The waleem is going to cost this much. I've got to have so much in my account. The truth is, if all of that's a requirement and she's asking, families are different, she's asking for it, don't marry her. Don't marry her. If it's the families and she's going, or she has to accept it, that's another thing. But if she's like, I want this, I want that, I want this, I want that, and she's putting a long list, don't marry her. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will provide from somewhere else. So don't let all of these cultural expectations of how much money you should have stop you from getting married. And this is something that there has to be some thought about practically how that can happen, because that person hasn't got money. How is he going to provide for himself? How is he going to pay for his wife, take care of his wife? There's some practical consideration, but those thoughts must be in place after having realized that Razzaq is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's the provider. So that's the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will unlock His provisions for you. He will provide for you. The fifth, which is one of the more important ones in these times, to protect you from haram. To protect you from haram. Why is it so important? We've already spoken about some issues. But when haram, you're bombarded with haram. You're bombarded with haram. Such that there's very few, even the most practicing Muslim who's not been exposed to haram, you see it everywhere you go. You're exposed to it everywhere. Because of that constant exposure, you have to be married. And those who are saying, in a normal situation, in fiqh it says sunnah mu'akkad to get married. The truth is we're not in normal situations. Normal situations mean you can really in a real sense, you can protect yourself from haram. But every single day you're going out and you're exposed to haram. You're going to work and you're exposed to haram. You go to university, one of the worst places where haram takes place. Haram is just everywhere around you. And you're saying it's a normal situation. It's not normal. It's not normal. It's impacting upon your heart all the time. And that's one of the reasons why we do not find ladha within our ibadah. That's one of the reasons why we don't find any enjoyment, any pleasure within our worship, because the poisoned arrows of the devil have been penetrating into our hearts all the time. Every time you look at somebody you're not allowed to look at, or something you're not allowed to look at, and it impacts upon your heart, that's a poisoned arrow of the devil into you. And when his poison goes in, what happens? It seeps through the heart and it eats away at the light of Iman that's within your heart. So now you stand up, Allahu Akbar, and then you come to Shaykh and say, I couldn't concentrate. So lower your gaze and you'll concentrate. Lower your gaze outside your worship and you'll concentrate. And when you stand in your worship, you're seeing all of these images of haram when you stood in your worship, because that's all you were exposed to out there. When you were out there, you weren't doing dhikr Allah, you weren't sending prayers upon the Prophet, you weren't exposed to the circles of light, the circles of knowledge. You were exposed to haram all the time. Marriage will give you that protection. Oh, young people, whoever is able should marry, for it lowers the gaze more and is more protecting of one's chastity. Whoever is not able should fast, for it is a shield. And bear in mind that last thing about fasting, for some, it doesn't impact. They'll fast and it's still a problem because of the sheer intensity of the haram that's been exposed. Like when you're drowning in filth, and we're all drowning in filth, right, what's going to take you out of that? Even the odd fast here and there is not going to, it will lessen it to a slight extent, because that's prophetic words and his words are absolutely true. But when you're so covered in filth, it's only going to have a limited effect upon you. So the only way you can protect is to enter into the door of marriage. To enter the door of marriage, and that will give you that protection. Wallahu a'lam. So from there, everybody, those who are not married, inshallah, if you're ready, you want to get married, we'll make some arrangements. Those who are just to add the point, I forgot to mention this a bit at the beginning. Those who came assuming this is a marriage service, it's because the last time it was run, wanted to assume that at the end of it we get married off. And one person phoned me, one person sent me an email, said, I've completed the course, where's my wife? This is just to give us some insight. There's no guarantees, inshallah. Make dua to Allah that He allows it to become easier. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. We've gone on late, so maybe if there's time for one or two questions, or any points of discussion anybody wants to raise. Yes.
So I just wanted to reinforce what you were saying as a therapist. I don't think people realise the extent of pornography, and even though you're saying, if you exposed to all this, don't get married, but the problems that we're having is this influence goes into the marriages.
Yes, it does, yeah.
So, I mean, just for the people to know that, subhanAllah, it is so extreme, the abuse cases, doing social services, you're doing child abuse, etc., incest, etc.
Yeah.
So it's reality. It truly is reality. You can see on the increase when people are speaking once from social services, kids are going to schools, etc.
Yeah.
More exposed, but it's something really to hold on to by the audience.
Thank you for mentioning that, because whenever that's mentioned, it always gets people always in the audiences always start feeling a bit uncomfortable, and one or two might just a nervous little giggle comes across them because it's never spoken of, but it is widespread, and people need to awaken to the fact that it's widespread. And then the other point there about it's worth just going reading some articles, read some research about the effect that pornography has exposure to marriage itself, the damage it has on the marriage. That man who can never be satisfied, because of what he's being exposed to. Just go away and read the damage that pornography has upon a marriage relationship. It's worth reading up on that. Wallahu a'lam. But all of those points, they're long discussions by themselves. They need sessions by themselves. We'll finish with that. Alhamdulillah.